Okay, I think maybe we can just start. Great. Good afternoon, everybody. Warm welcome to all of you who've joined us for this fireside chat as part of the Reboot series by ABC Consultants. So our topic for today is the future of education, and clearly it's something I think that's of great interest. We've had last I checked, over 1,550 registrations for today's session there. So India has 1.5 million schools, 1,000 universities, 50,000 colleges, 400 million students, with over, I think, 40 million of them in higher education. The education sector is something that touches all our lives, and its importance clearly cannot be overemphasized. This current disruption has really given educators time to rethink the sector. We went from classroom to Zoom almost overnight. Technology has stepped in and clearly will play a big role in educating future generations. In a world where knowledge is now a mouse click away, I think the role of the educator must change too. So how are organizations and institutions involved in education coping with this crisis and possibly reimagining their future? What does the so-called new normal look like in the context of education? To help us understand this, we have an elite panel of top leaders from across the spectrum of the education sector. So we have K-12, higher education, test prep, skilling, and of course, EdTech. So perhaps a quick round of introductions of our 6 panelists. Let me start with Shaheen. Shaheen Mistry is CEO of Teach for India. Shaheen grew up in 5 countries around the world and returned to India when she was 18 to start Akanksha Foundation. For 17 years, she worked with teachers and students building Akanksha to provide children with from low-income communities the kind of education that would maximize their greatest potential. In 2008, Shaheen founded Teach for India with an audacious vision of providing an excellent education to all children across India through building a pipeline of leaders committed to ending educational inequality in India. Today, Teach for India directly impacts over 32,000 children. Shaheen has been an Ashoka Fellow, a global leader for tomorrow at the World Economic Forum, and an Asia Society 21 leader. He is the author of the book Redrawing India and has a master's degree from the University of Manchester. Welcome, Shaheen. Dr. Aseem Chauhan is Chancellor of Amity University and trustee of the not-for-profit Amity Education Group, which includes 10 world-class universities, 25 schools and preschools, 150 top-ranked institutions, 15 international campuses, and 50 campuses in India with over 175,000 students. The Economic Times awarded him with Asia's Most Promising Business Leader Award 2019, and he was listed among the 50 most influential young Indians by GQ magazine. So Aseem, you're still young. That's great. Mm-hmm. Aseem holds degrees in engineering, finance, and strategic management from the Wharton Business School at the University of Pennsylvania, and is an alumnus of the prestigious Jerome Fisher Program in Management and Technology. Welcome, Aseem. Manish Kumar is the Managing Director and CEO of the National Skill Development Corporation. NSDC aims to provide skill development by catalyzing creation of large, quality, and for-profit vocational institutions. Prior to joining NSDC, Manish was with the World Bank across India, Middle East, and several North African countries. He served in the Indian Administrative Service, occupying various positions in the government of Tripura up to 2011. Manish is a Bachelor of Technology in Mining Machinery from IIT Dhanbad, a Master's in Public Administration from Harvard University, and a PhD in Public Policy from the George Washington University in DC. Manish, welcome. Ronnie Screwvala, who doesn't really need too much of an introduction to anybody in India, but Ronnie is the co-founder and chairman of Upgrad, India's largest online higher education company providing industry-relevant programs. Ronnie is a first-generation entrepreneur who pioneered cable TV in India and went on to create a media and entertainment giant UTV that all of us know, which he divested to the Walt Disney Company in 2012. Esquire rated him as one of the 75 most influential people of the 21st century, and Fortune as Asia's 25 most powerful. On his second innings now, Ronnie is driven by his interest in championing entrepreneurship. authored a book on entrepreneurship titled Dream with Your Eyes Open, which I have actually behind me there somewhere in my bookshelf, and is also focused to build his next set of ground up businesses in high growth and impact sectors, including education, of course. Ronnie, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Akash Chaudhary. Akash is CEO of Akash Educational Services. AESL is a leading educational institution in India that provides comprehensive test preparatory services to students preparing for medical, engineering entrance exams besides other foundational level exams. Akash is also founder and trustee at Laksha University. In 2018, he was recognized as one of the disruptive leaders by Business World and was named in the coveted 40 under 40 young leaders list. He's a computer science engineer, an MBA from ISB, and an alumnus of Harvard Business School. Akash, good to have you. And finally, Tara. Tara Vachani is the managing trustee of Max India Foundation, and she oversees Max Group's social responsibility efforts. She's also the executive chairman of Antara Senior Living, that aims to give a new dimension to senior living in India. Tara is a 2020 member of Young Global Leaders, a part of the World Economic Forum. A natural leader, she represents the dynamic new cadre of young women entrepreneurs in India. Tara has majored in politics and South Asian studies at the National University of Singapore. And also, Tara has kindly agreed to be moderator for today. So without any further delay, Tara, over to you.
Absolutely. Thank you, Shiv, and welcome all our panelists and, of course, all of our participants. It's quite interesting to be moderating a session where really individually and collectively all of your experience and vision for the education sector is so advanced. I'm a newbie in this space, but what I can say is very, very passionate about this space, and my journey is starting. So maybe my curiosity will help drive this discussion over the next 50 minutes. And with that, I'd like to start with you, Shaheen. I know, of course, Teach for India very closely, sitting on the Delhi board, and a space I get goosebumps thinking about what you do. But for all of our participants today, if you could spend a minute just talking about the real philosophy and ideology of Teach for India and that vision that you have created over so many years, and whether that vision has had to take any sort of pivot during this time. And will that pivot, you think, be a permanent pivot, or will you be able to sort of regroup and go back to how you did things before this entire situation came about?
Thanks, Tara. So, Teach for India essentially is trying to build a movement of leaders who are across all different sectors, but focused on a singular goal of eliminating educational inequity in India. So that's what we set out to do and have tried to do over the last decade. And we've done it by selecting and placing very high potential young people in classrooms across the country, and charging them with the mission of transforming children's lives in the short term, and then going out and being multipliers and thinking about scale in the long term. So that's what we do. As COVID, it's been interesting. I think that the biggest pivot was we realized that what our families needed was food and rations, and we were not a food and ration organization, but we just converted ourselves literally overnight into being able to do that. And so there's been a massive relief effort. So that was one immediate pivot, which hopefully will not be a long-term pivot. But the more significant long-term opportunity, I think, and I'm sort of kicking myself thinking, why didn't we think about this pre-COVID, is the opportunity that blended learning gives us, and not just virtual, but I use the word blended intentionally. We're now imagining that our teachers are not only teachers of the physical classroom, but teachers of the virtual classroom as well. And so if you think about it, the shift is really from thinking that I'm responsible for children while I'm in a classroom for a couple of hours, to really learning happens from life, learning happens from everywhere. And for us, this is particularly significant because blended learning can be the digital equalizer for low-income kids. You see, before, a high-income kid got the good teacher, the good resource, but now with a tablet in my hand or a smartphone, even for part of my time, I can access the world's greatest stories, ideas, people, and education becomes a right that I hold. So I think that's the permanent longer-term shift we want to make.
Right. And, just a quick follow-up question to that before I move forward is that from my understanding, the fellows and so much of their experience and exposure and development comes from the physicality of that classroom, and having to go through the grind of standing in 40 degrees heat in the middle of summer. So without that component, which I'm assuming post-COVID shouldn't exist, but if it were to, do you feel that endurance that you're trying to teach your fellows starts to dwindle, and therefore does the fellowship at all become slightly irrelevant in this piece?
I think it's a different challenge. I mean, firstly, I have a lot of hope that schools will reopen at some point, and so actually this will be a physical plus virtual. But I think the challenge has shifted. See, today, a significant percentage of our kids have migrated back to the village. Some of them are not accessible through data. Most of them don't have access to hardware. And yet you're charged to reach every single kid and provide them with a holistic education despite all of that. So I think the challenges are very overwhelming and significant. They're just different challenges. And the challenge right now is to be asking ourselves the question, how do we really make sure that we're not just taking what was previously actually quite bad quality education, right? Teacher, whiteboard, blackboard, videotaping it and putting it online. That's not what's going to work. But really asking ourselves, how do we build authentic relationships online? How do we foster peer-to-peer learning online? So that really, that the learning curve of how do you deliver what we know really works in a traditional classroom online in a way that accelerates kids' opportunities even more significantly. I think that's the challenge for the 2020 cohort coming in.
Thank you, Shine. And Akash, in a way, this brings me to something I wanted to ask you, which is to say, 1/4 of the population has internet access. Everything you have done with your organization, and if you could spend a minute as well talking about your journey in the organization, has been online. And with Plaksha as well, now we'd love to know a little bit about the philosophy, ideology there. But how do you sort of, address this entire online piece, given access not just to the internet, but the hardware of tablets, etc., connectivity, electricity, all of those barriers? How have you navigated that at this time, and what do you see the next 5 years look like within the online space?
So Tara, this is absolutely something which is very, very critical at this stage. And, our experience has been that it's not only the internet and devices. I think there is a lot more, happening at the ground. You rightly mentioned about 27% of Indian population has internet access, and only half of them have actually continuous internet to do something on it. Having access is not really use of internet. So given this kind of dynamics that exist in this country, education, which is so very much important and connected directly or indirectly with one or the other in the country, it is such an element which is actually standing at a position where people who do not have access, and in a COVID situation, they're not even able to go to offline school, not able to access online education. The daily midday meals are shut down. The daily medicines, the zinc tablets and the vitamins are shut down. So what I'm looking at is this thing continues for another 6 months or 8 months. We're actually pushing back, the entire effort that the government did for last 10 to 15 years of bringing people out of child labor, bringing people into the education ecosystem, bringing faculties and teachers into the education system. So I think that we are actually, we're actually looking at only the IT infrastructure, but the things that work at the back end are highly troublesome. So what we've been trying to do is, in the limited space of test prep, that people who have internet access, we provide them programs, and people who do not have internet access, can we, some way circumvent the whole internet need and go direct to them through satellite, or put some kind of a solution that can enable them to continue learning irrespective of what infrastructure or internet capacities there are. So I think that has been our focus for the last 3 months, and so we've been successful in bits and pieces. I won't say, because there's been very limited access to operations, access to movement. Having said that, we also felt, as far as higher education is concerned, and that's where I'm going to talk about, what we are doing in Plaksha. It was absolutely set on the parameters and the models that we've already seen in case of ISB, in case of Ashoka. It was a collective philanthropy that people from the industry, people from the sector came together and wanted to do something wonderful, as far as management education is concerned, liberal arts is concerned. Now, there's this absolutely favorite stream in India, which is technology education. And more so now, we're all talking with the help of technology, which has again come on the forefront, that how can we bring an education system and pedagogy in India that teaches Indians for the Indian problems so that they can solve them and then take those technologies to the global world. And I think that was the whole pillar, behind setting up Plaksha. And the way we are putting the whole curriculum together, we are looking at solving today's problem. We're solving problems and programs which are related to data science, material science, sustainability. I think these are the areas which people tend to, chance upon in their career when they're, 30 years old or after their postgraduate. So this is something we want to give it right at the beginning, when somebody is right after class 12 and has decided, okay, material science is my thing. Can I innovate? Can I learn about it? Can I see the role of nanotechnology within material science? I think these are the programs which nobody has ever imagined how impactful they can be for a country like India that needs economical and solution for masses. I think that's what we're trying to do.
Wonderful. And, Ronnie, as a entrepreneur and a visionary in the online education space, I've been reading about Upgrad and all of the interesting things that you've done so far, and you continue to innovate in that space. So if you could share with our participants again your philosophy and drive for having created the organization. And essentially, do you feel at this point in time, considering the narrative is so steered towards online learning, is this going to become commoditized? Is there going to be oversupply? Are people going to value this enough? We were reading about an example of yours where you had anticipated your organization potentially having a slowdown, but you actually found the demand for everything you were doing staying stable, and therefore you reversed some of your decisions internally. So would love to be able to get some light on this from you.
Sure, thanks. And look, before that, I just want to relate to something that Shaheen said a little earlier about blended learning. And I want to tell you that before I talk about Upgrad, which is an for-profit, our not-for-profits for this foundation in rural India, we work with about 1,200 schools and about 800 Anganwadis. Wow. And I have to tell you that in the last 3.5 months, the revelations of this element of blended learning, knowing that schools may not open for a fair period of time, has actually been phenomenal. And we've actually used that now as a technique in rural India to talk about everything from livelihoods, financial inclusion, aspiration and ambition in rural India, and with a lot of young students and young people is low. And now I can see this as such a powerful tool. So, it says what Shaheen said, that, sometimes it's staring at you and you don't get it till you kind of get it. And so to me, that's a very, very powerful tool. Blended, but definitely something that I think this is not just education for the event of education. We kind of bracket that into school and college. I'm a strong proponent of lifelong learning in that context. And that's what is the one-line vision for what we want to do. There is the K-12, but from the age of 18 to the age of 48 and 50, people are going to have to. In fact, the people at 35, 45 are going to be more insecure about their jobs, about their careers, about the crossroad, about younger people overtaking them, about specialization and so many other issues. So I think the element of urban India, and people look at this as, is this more about urban and rural, and will the divide be more? And I'm saying you couldn't be far away from the truth, because actually it's going to get things together. And running a not-for-profit of the scale at which we are with our Swadesh Foundation, I can tell you that it's been magical in the last 2.5 to 3 months to work with the communication of learning more than the word education.
Absolutely.
To come specifically, therefore, to your point on, see, I think right now there's a fair amount of evangelism that's happening on online education. But I think we have to be a little cautious about that, because online education is not about switching on a camera and about somebody on the other side and then 30 students on this side. That's not really online education. There's a deep learning experience, as all of us in this panel will keep talking about. And learning experience is going to be much more evolved than substituting a lecture context, which will be part of the COVID area. That's convenience. But deep learning, and I think the ability in the blended model that we have found is that the feedback all our learners can get every week, every 2 weeks, and the data that you get from them is incredible and mind-blowing when you want to look at it compared to the offline world. In a classroom, if you have a class of 100 people, it is almost impossible to necessarily give them every 2 weeks feedback. Here in the online space, every 2 weeks, because of their mentoring and rating, they can get direct feedback. We can find out if somebody's gone back to the same class of that same 7-minute video, and if they played it 4 times, our counselor goes back and says, well, looks like this particular lesson for you is a little hard to understand. Can we help you with that? That's the kind of data and the power. But for that, we need to evolve that online should not be in the COVID and in the post-COVID era looked at as a camera in front of you, but it is a deep learning experience.
Right. No, absolutely. I think that's fascinating. I mean, that's one of the reasons why the whole concept of, SATs and those platforms are all done to assess your competency levels as you are taking that test, rather than the same content being pushed down everybody's throat all at once. And, Ronnie used the word lifelong learning, and I couldn't help but navigate the next question to you, because the journey you have had and your organization had literally touches lives at the foundational learning level at kindergarten stage. And you go all the way up, to undergrad and I think postgrad as well. So the blended learning piece for you, or the transition that you see in your cohort from foundational learning all of the way up to getting people equipped for the workforce. Tell us a little bit about the last 6 months and how it's been for your organization, and some key revelations that you've had over this journey that you think are short-term, mid-term, and long-term.
So I have to say, with a word of caution, it's not been totally magical in that sense. I think everyone thought for EdTech, 2000 was to the IT companies and demonetization was to the FinTech companies. I think for me, the learning is that what we wanted to do over the next 4 to 5 years, because of this and because of the attention and because of the evangelism and because of the urgency and because of the center stage, we'll be able to do it in 2.5 years. But to think that over the next 3 months or in these 3 months and 6 months, is anything magical happened? No. I think what has happened is, even in the homes where online was, what are you doing sitting in front of a computer from 11 to 3 a.m. to figure out what you're going to do on a course or a Sunday morning or taken away from family time? People have now understood what that is. So parental spouse support has been very high. Urgency has come about. And, in many ways, education and learning is cyclical, in the sense is it's counterintuitive. And actually people look and turn towards lifelong learning and some sense of education or some sense of topping up at a time where they feel they're going to be in some sense of a long sense of depression or an insecurity in a job. So to that extent, I think the changes that we felt it's making a big difference. It's doing to people what you could have taken another 5 years to do in 2.5 years. But anything more than that, I think, is exaggerated media stories for valuations for EdTech companies, which I wouldn't give too much countenance to.
Thank you. That's a very frank way to end your answer, and very, very important for us to keep that in mind. Aseem, I'd love your thoughts on what I asked as well.
Yeah, sure, Tara. Great to be here with so many friends and colleagues and having this exciting discussion. Tara, you asked about the last 6 months and then the future. And of course, we as an education group with multiple facilities across the country and brought with the desire to create an Indian education brand that can stand for research and innovation and really go outwards and take Indian education and philosophies to the world. The last 6 months have been a transition in which we have, of course, like many other people, gone online. And there are evident changes, but then there are some more subtle changes that I think will have longer term ramifications. So going online, of course, has more operational challenges. How do you take literally hundreds of thousands of students online overnight? How do you do examinations? How do you do practicals? And all of these things are part of what we're currently going through in this pandemic. But what I feel is more interesting is the experiments that will have a longer term impact on who we are as a sector. So number one, I feel we have just undergone the largest forced faculty development program experiment in the history of the Indian education sector, with literally millions of teachers and faculty members working day and night to transition and to learn how to use technology. And education globally has not been really one where pioneering actions are taken by these bastions of higher education that have been around for hundreds of years. But that is changing now. And for every faculty member, every teacher having exposure and experience in technologies, partnering with other companies, I think that is something that we are not going back from. And then also the realization that our students are driving this change, and the fact that students are so savvy these days, and younger kids are going to be even more savvy with tablets in their hands from a young age. By the time they come up to higher education, the expectations of those students are very different. And how do we evolve as education providers to keep pace with the change that students expect? But my view is that what we are currently going through is not even the biggest disruption yet. It is maybe a lens to the future. And universities and institutions have invested in manpower training, but also infrastructure and CTOs and the technology. But the real disruption will come through the foundation this has laid in terms of artificial intelligence and other technologies that will come right in the not so distant future, which will really help decide who are the organizations that are willing to move with the times and who are those that will become obsolete over time. And there will be, of course, as you mentioned rightly, Tara, models of blended learning, what I call seamlessly integrated organic hybrids that will have functionality both on the ground, but also in the online space in-house, that develop capacity and capabilities to offer online degrees, but also certification and diplomas, and that can toggle effectively between offline and online in a way that these two words will no longer exist anymore. It will just be the new reality, the new norm. And one can toggle not only in terms of programs, but minute to minute, hour to hour, between the experience that will be the most beneficial to the students. So I think the future is bright, but we all have to find the right direction, the right partnerships, and it is exciting to be part of it. The other thing, just that one point I just wanted to also point out is that I was also very interested to hear when you talk to the kids that are studying, and we all have maybe friends or kids of our own. Many of them say, I look forward to being back in school. Parents are saying, I can't wait for kids to go back to school. So there is also an aspect of socialization, of that human interface that is so important for education. And that makes me believe that whereas online education and going to lifelong learning, like Ronnie said, which I think is so point on, at the end of it, there have to be blended models, because at the end of it, we learn by interacting with others. The creativity, the challenges that we have to face come through interaction with other people. And I think we'll be going to that model also for sure.
Thank you very much for that, Aseem. And Manish, this sort of segues into, a fundamental question, between Shaheen, Akash, Ronnie, and Aseem. We've talked about literally, like I said, foundational learning all of the way up to post-grad learning. But the question and the domain that you come from, I think the validity, and it's maybe a slightly controversial question is, as Indians and as a country, are we over-obsessed about classical education? And while we've talked about how this is imparted over these last months, the question to you really is the what as well. That are we, over-obsessed about this and the degrees and getting the qualifications, whether offline, online, or blended? And are we not putting enough emphasis on skills? And therefore, is the content really of what we are teaching online, offline, and blended really going to be effective or valuable as we go along? And especially now, when the debate on employment and equipping young India to be able to create a livelihood also exists. How do we balance all of this out from the domain that you come with. And we'd love to also, in that same context, know a little bit about you and the wonderful work that you do.
Thank you, Tara. That's a lot to answer in a short time. But I think, coming back to your first question about whether we value education far too much compared to skills, I personally feel we do, and probably that's a legacy of the British rule. That's what I feel about it. That there was a time in India, if you go back to history, we were well known for our skills. When we go back to maybe 500 years, 7,000, and you still find a lot of very good structures made by Indians and skill-related stuff which you see across the country. Come the British time, and I think they needed a lot of clerks. They made us learn English, and I think the Macaulay's philosophy of trying to convert Indians into brown sahibs, I think we ended up loving that particular job a little too much, and over time becoming civil servant and all that. So I think we have become we are changing. I'm aware that India is, when we talk of India, it's not really, everything can be partially true and partially false, because it's a question of which part of India we are talking about. But I'm just making a generalization, given the provocative question you had, that my feeling is, as a legacy, we have changed from our skill orientation to a little higher level of education orientation. But we are changing again. That's my belief. Because of the fact that the whole economy is changing, and this has happened post 1990s, once with the internet coming in, and the manner in which I think the jobs are changing, the kind of knowledge which jobs now require. Now we have realized that while you might have a foundational education, which is driven by Industry 2.0, you still have a classroom which moves from class 1 to class 10 and 12, 11 and 12. But Industry 4.0 actually requires you to think differently. They want you to have bite-sized knowledge which are relevant to jobs that you enter into. And I think that's where skills come in. And these skills is not necessarily the skills that people traditionally think of as just a carpentry. When you think of a carpenter, you think in a typical sense we have a picture of a person who just has a saw. But if you go to some of the real carpentry business today on the outskirts of Mumbai, it's highly sophisticated business. And you still have traditional carpenters actually learning it and picking that up. And it's a lot of IT-related, IoT-related stuff which they do. So therefore, there is a new paradigm which is coming in, and there's much we can do on that. The challenge, I think, in the current time has been for us particularly because we skill about 50 lakh people in a year. And over the last 4 months, I have noticed that we have managed to skill 8 lakhs. We have managed to do online. But then most of them are now crowded into ITA space. Whereas we work in 37 different sectors. So if it's gems and jewelry, we don't find too many people out there. If it is construction, not too many people out there. So therefore, there are sectors which are doing well and sectors which are not doing well. And partially that's the nature of skills, because skills require psychomotor ability, psychomotor skills that you need to build up. You also need to have hand-eye coordination. That comes only when you're working in real life with certain stuff. It's not something which you can just look at the screen and learn. So that's a natural disadvantage. What has happened is in this time, I think what Roni was saying is really struck me, that all of us, we are forced to think very deeply that how much of what we do, we can do online. Ordinarily, perhaps we wouldn't have veered in that direction, but this moment has forced us to think very deeply. And we actually have found there's quite a bit which we can do online, a lot of things which we can do online. So all the 37 sectors we have divided, and we have broken down that entire value chain of skilling, things which could be done online and therefore made more efficient and save a lot of time, crunch a lot of stuff, and post-COVID, I think we are going to go back to classrooms. I'm quite sure about that. I also believe that you should never confuse academics with education. Education requires people to meet other people and learn from them. It's not just about studying in books. We have also found from experience that almost 30% of wages that people earn, and this is a Wadhwani Foundation work that we had done jointly, is actually explained by the soft skills. And these come when people are interacting with others. And that's not an online interaction. So therefore, while we have learned a lot, that this awareness has helped us to transform ourselves from where we were, I'm quite sure that when things turn around, we will be back to classrooms, yet more work would be done online. That's for sure, because there's a lot of learning which has happened. because of this gap in between.
Wonderful. Thank you for that. Akash, what do you feel has been, your past 100 days? We obviously talked a little bit about your organizations, but you so deeply rooted in this space. Tell us a little bit about your professional and personal learnings over the last 100 days. And obviously, when you do talk of your professional learning, you will link so much into the online and the quality around the online piece. So to talk a little bit about that, we'd love to hear from you.
See, professionally, first of all, it was a shock. So 23rd, 22nd March, when the lockdown was announced. So obviously everybody was, taken aback. So as all the education was shut down. So obviously, professionally, it was a testing time for all of us. But I think, we've definitely learned, that, there are many things that can come out of this situation. If something is not working out, something else will work out. So I think we started working more on what can be than, what can't be. So I think that really kept us going. For example, all our offline kids, they were actually about to start their classes from 25th March. There were about more than 1 lakh kids, in different parts of the country. And 3 days before, this entire lockdown was announced. So it took us about 7 days to transition all our kids to an online platform. Fortunately for us, we've been investing in, tech for a long time, for the last 6-7 years. We were able to move kids to digital platform and at least, get them going in terms of their continuous learning. And as you know that in the test prep, the month of March and April are very critical in terms of entrance exams, and all the kids have been preparing for it for many, many years, some for 1 year, some for 2 years, some even more. So it was very, very disturbing act for them. So we had to really pitch in and really turn them around, give them that help. One of the interesting thing I noticed, the teachers who were absolutely against technology, as Aseem also mentioned, they were quick to pick up very, very well. And students who would actually discard digital education program that they are not effective, they are not productive, they picked it up, they lapped it up, and showing 80-90% attendance. So I think this behavior was a very, very pleasant surprise for us, and we learned that it's at the end of the day, it all boils down to your mindset and the current situation you are. You don't respond to a person or an activity, you respond to a situation. And I think in that situation, people responded and they sort of shed away their, apprehensions of moving on to a new technology. Whether it is teachers, we continued a lot of training for them. Whether it was parents, who were actually doing a role of a support item or a support actor, suddenly they became the new proctor. Kid is sitting in front of them, dad has a meeting and followed by a child has a class and followed by the other child has a class. So it became a very, very well orchestrated, administration at home where, there are limited devices and one internet. I think we've seen all of that and we reached out to parents how you can manage it. We created timetables, we created motivation sessions, we created all of these things. So last 100 days, on the professional side has been, quite a journey, and it also helped us look inside, what are the areas that we can save in terms of, our costs, what are the areas where we were lacking, what are the areas we were lacking in digital, how can we improve that. So I think it was a very, very, I would say blessing in disguise, till now that we understand what are the weaknesses that we need to cover. But on the personal side, it's been I would say, very interesting because typically don't get to spend time with family. Everybody's been home last 100 days. It's been a blessing. I didn't know the likes and dislikes of my own kids. So, it gave me a time to really spend time with them. Discovered my own, love for cooking, started doing that a bit for the family. So something, it has really given us a moment to step back and look at, the race that you're running. How much value are you really adding, or are you just multiplying some numbers? As they say, growth is not about increasing numbers. Growth is with, some value and substance in it. So I think that's been a bit, very, very insightful for us. And, education is so very important. India like country, I mean, we've been the education capital of the world. for many, many years. Somebody mentioned, I think Manish mentioned, the history there, Takshila, Nalanda. I mean, we keep discussing when we are like we are sitting on the Plaksha discussion. There's so much out there to be innovated in education, and it can actually come from the Indian stable. And we have all kinds of dimensions, the rich class, the not so rich class, the geographically divided class, the digitally divided class. And this is a perfect, thought bread for innovation as far as education is concerned. I think the next 2 years going to be a great ground, and we'll see many innovations coming out because of COVID pushed us in a corner, and we're going to come back out of it stronger.
Very interesting. Thank you, Akash. Seem Ronnie mentioned that through this entire period of online, there's almost been a better way of assessing and reading your students and how they are progressing. Akash mentioned the ability for teachers to pivot. How have you found in your domain and space these two things have come together? Have you also had a similar experience where you have been able to monitor and map the effectiveness of the education and the content to your children? And how have you really gotten your teachers upskilled to be able to manage the balance of the online space and the skill set needed for that space?
Sorry, question to Aseem?
Yes, that was to Aseem.
Yeah, sure, absolutely, great. Tara, it's a good question, and it is something which we generally have to be very, very thoughtful about. I think the assessment part of it, and the content also, that what are we teaching? I think it is a good time to reflect on that. Many of the jobs that will be there in the next 15, 20 years don't exist today. So the question of what we are teaching and why we are teaching, the curriculum that we are teaching, is something that has to be thought very carefully. And then after the what comes the how. How are we teaching it? The same content taught in a different way can lead to incredibly different results and outcomes. So this thought of how are we interacting with students, what is the content that we have, and then how are we assessing it is something very interesting. What we have seen is that there are a large number of education tools available, and I've been amazed at how well our faculty have adopted and adapted. And I'll give you a few examples. When you are teaching an online class and you do a quick online quiz while you're teaching, you immediately are able to not only get the result of who is paying attention, but also who is learning what level. You combine that with areas of adaptive learning, and you're really able to get a picture of the individualized learning patterns of different students. So I think the data around what you can collect in these models is very important. My feeling is that even when we go back to a more normal model, in which we have more blended learning, and when we have students sitting in a classroom, even then we will be utilizing more technology embedded in a classroom to be able to understand the individual needs of students, and also the assessment and examination systems will have more of this feedback loop. That is, each student understanding to the best of their ability what are their needs, and then the ability to be able to feed that student with the right kind of learning based on that feedback loop. I think this is going to be one of the very important aspects of what this experience gives us going forward also.
Right. Wonderful. And Ronnie, to you also mentioned the quality of engagement in a way has been a very interesting experience. Where do you feel this balance between scale and engagement is going to emerge over the next few years? And also, in a way, is this now a credibility inflection point for the various organizations and institutions that are online, and how you balance that out in your own mind?
So I think the magical word is scale. And I don't think we should use scale in a negative, because, when you look at education, when you look at scale, it just sounds like one clean sweep. It sounds like a mass thing, and it's not. Manish just mentioned that, on their platform, they've done multiple. They wouldn't have been able to do the 8 lakh if it wasn't for this whole element of technology that comes in there. I know it's, as he said rightly, I've got to place it now in the right quarters, but it's IT. So to me, if I look at it, it really boils down to the fact that what is technology doing? And I go back to the fact that it's not a camera in front of you. So just from that perspective, what technology is doing and adding to the entire part. I can only give you an example where we have classes where we have 600 students, we have 1,300 students, and we have 60 students. And I do want to tell you that the 1,600 and the 1,500 students, the engagement level is phenomenal. And the reason for that is the technology platform. Firstly, our technology platform takes anonymity out of online education. And what do I mean by that? It's very important in the online space because in college, you make friends immediately and you go into university, and if you're a dropout, it's public. Here, you don't need to log on the next day and you're a dropout. So how do you take that element out of this blended and specifically online learning? So I think the element of technology, their ability to do because basically in summation, your counselors or your teachers, your case studies, your networking, your feedback mechanism, those are the things that get you there. And I think the peer-to-peer learning that a good technology platform can do for online learning will in any way not allow scale to come in the way. Mm-hmm. And at the end of the day, we're 1.3 billion people. We have a lot of catching up to do. We have to only solve problems at scale in India. Anything that we do, we have to solve problems at scale. So we shouldn't run away from that and poo-poo it by saying, you know, the minute scale comes in, will there be a sense of quality? Yes. You can get quality, you can get quality engagement, you can get quality content, you can get quality learning, you can get quality counseling, all of that at scale. And frankly, for India, we don't have a choice. We need to do it because that's the only way we're going to solve problems.
Yeah, very interesting. Thank you. And Manish, this question for you, which is, very interesting, the fact that, you have been able to do 5 lakh skilling online and the fact that there are certain sectors that have an uptake and that certain sectors don't because of physicality of it. But what do you feel schools, universities, whether online, whether offline, training institutions, etc., need to be doing more of to help the skilling and the employment situation that is happening in India pre-COVID, during COVID, post-COVID, because now everything really has bundled into one way forward that we need as a country. So I'd love to know a little bit about that from you.
Thank you. I think that's a very important issue, and we are quite deeply engaged on that. One thing is to introduce skilling in schools. And this week, early this week, we had a meeting with the chairman of CBSE, who was very interested to have skilling introduced into CBSE schools. We already work with 10,500 schools across the country and all about 25 different states. And we skill about 10 lakh children on various parts. This is in class 9, 10, 11, and 12, actually 4 years. And there are 76 different trades which they could select. So there is a whole arrangement that we have made. The idea being that supposing somebody doesn't want to go to higher education after +2 and he wants to go away to something which relates to vocational, then he should have that choice. And we have been discussing with the ministry that can we have a method of credit transfers that in case he wants to come back to academics, he could go back to regular academics too. So therefore, kind of cross movement between the vocational education and the regular academic sessions that one has. So this is one connection at the school level. We also got some very modern kind of skilling models, which is called Kunskapsskolan model, that's bought from Sweden. And though it is run in schools, also for classrooms, but we have modified it to the context of skilling. And it's being introduced in about 100 schools in Haryana as a kind of experimentation. So we will see how that goes. Then coming to colleges, we actually have devised courses in logistics, in media, and retail, 3 of them, which is completely apprenticeship based. So you could do a 3-year course and get a degree with you, which is like a regular degree. But you would actually be doing classroom learning. Then you would be doing a kind of lab-based learning. And then you go and actually work on the software. So all the 3 things together in a way. And that's how things are done in Germany and other places. So therefore, we're trying to introduce that at college level. We know that about 500 colleges have taken that up at the moment. And we expect that maybe they will increase more in number. So those are kind of interventions that we have tried to make skilling more popular as well as more mainstreamed in the educational system.
Very interesting. And thank you for that, because Shaheen, that brings me to to Teach for India, which is wanting and focusing on creating a cohort of young Indians that are equipped to be able to go back into the society and do multiple roles. How are you going to now navigate the fact that a lot of the fellows are going to struggle to get jobs in the next year or two, given the, and how can we balance a little bit of what Manish has just said and the pivots for the fellowship program that you are doing, and what would your message really be to the young Indians that have been aspiring to be fellows so far? We'd love to know that a little bit, and maybe you could spend a minute to talk about the age group and the background of the fellows that are part of the Teach for India system.
Sure, thanks, Tara. I mean, we recruit fellows from across the country. It's a highly selective process. We select about 7% of applicants, and they come in and teach low-income students for 2 years. So that's what we do. I think this year the role is going to shift in 2 ways. One is there's going to need to be a lot more catering to the basic needs of children. Our kids have more mental health issues than before. A lot of them are unsafe at home. A lot of them are grappling with families who are now slipping into poverty. So there's a community aspect that will become stronger in the fellowship this year. And the second is the upskilling for the fellow on this blended learning vision. The interesting thing though, Tara, is we were very worried about what our numbers would look like this year. And of course, social sector, there are just so many other peripheral issues that are hitting us. We, touch wood, are bringing in a cohort of 500 this year that are coming in knowing that they're not stepping directly into physical classrooms. They're going to be trained fully online starting this Monday. And I think they're coming in with a lot of fire to really create this new way of teaching and learning, not just for their students, but for them as well. And the entire fellowship is pivoting to saying, how can teacher education radically shift and change as well? Very, very exciting, because you can imagine now that our top 10 math teachers could conceivably be teaching every Teach for India child, right? So the way you're able to think, the role of parents has fundamentally shifted. Like, parents are teachers today for our children. And so we're thinking about that. How do we mobilize parents as even greater partners in understanding the shift to blended? So many opportunities, I think, for incoming fellows this year. And to the point around them 2 years from now getting jobs, like, I just want to go back to the point you addressed, Manish, around, you know, really what are we teaching in education? And for me, like, COVID has been such a reminder of the importance of what we're loosely calling 21st century skills. I mean, what's put us on this panel today is not rote learning and the content we learned in school. It's the fact that we are curious and critical thinkers and collaborative and compassionate human beings. And how do we really sort of pivot education to revolve around those skills? And we're seeing that the kids that are stepping up today in these times and figuring out access and how to keep learning going are the kids who have those skills.
I'm smiling because one of the ways I had wanted to wrap up our conversation between question and answers was actually to talk exactly about what you did, Shaheen. You know, one of my deepest areas of work through our foundation is the C-Learning curriculum, which is a social, emotional, ethical curriculum. Shaheen knows about it. It's a curriculum that was developed between His Holiness the Dalai Lama and Emory and MIT, and it's a completely secular curriculum. And the C stands for social, emotional, and ethics. And one of their entire, it's a completely scientific research-based work that has taken 6 years to put together, because their whole idea and fundamental intuition has been that the way in which we teach, not necessarily what we teach, but the way in which we teach have to follow value-based learning. So this curriculum is not one class for 30 minutes in the week, but how you start your day, end your day in a math classroom, physics classroom, science classroom. What are the values that you can incorporate in that teaching methodology that build resilience, that build compassion, that build all of these values that then equalize, issues that we are facing today of mental health and of all the other struggles that people are coming through. And I, of course, know a little bit of how TFI is doing this, but I would love to hear from all of our panelists your viewpoint on value-based learning and some of the softer parts of learning that are very, very critical for today's India, today's world actually, but let's keep it focused on India because that's a large enough effort for us. So Aseem, I'd love to hear from you how Amity, incorporates value-based learning in what you're doing and the relevance of it for you today.
Yeah, I think it's a wonderful point, Tara, and it is something that we have believed in very strongly from our very inception, that value-based and ethics as part of the curriculum. In fact, I'll share with you that each one of our students in higher education, in every semester, doesn't matter if they're from engineering or mass comm or psychology, they get modules in behavioral science, what we call behavioral science, every semester. And this is a very well-researched curriculum around how to develop the softer skills. When we talked about earlier, how do we think about what we are teaching? I think this point about, the skills that will really get our students ready for the future with a changing landscape are really those things that are softer. And I think Shaheen has verbalized it wonderfully, that areas of lateral thinking, creativity, compassion, values, how do you do that? And so we have been doing it from the very beginning in the form of behavioral science. A lot of our curriculum is based on value addition programs. So apart from the core curriculum that you're learning, you are getting modules in a whole host of other areas that we feel will prepare you through soft skill training for a life of learning how to learn, apart from just learning what you're learning as part of the curriculum. And we absolutely believe in this as a core part of what we do.
Fantastic. Thank you. Aseem, Rani, I'd love to hear from you how you are approaching this entire space in the domain that you're in.
Well, firstly, I'd like to say, I think I'm a product of soft skills and not of hard skills. I am a product where I think I learned early in life, and I'm very proud of it. Do I miss the deep learning and some of the formal training that could have happened with that? Absolutely. But can that replace any of that? Not at all. And I think that's really what everyone needs to understand, because I think today, in some ways, our society and our pressures have also forced us to think and get obsessed with the degree learning, which there's nothing wrong with it. It's important. Formal and deep learning is very critical. But without that and without the soft skills, actually, it's going to be non-implementable, really, really not implementable. So I think when we do our 11-month courses on machine learning to artificial intelligence to data analytics, it's deep learning. But the weekends, we actually give the live lectures on soft skills. One of the feedback we get is a lot of people have a lot of deep learning, but interview skills, just basic thing is interview skills. And that's just very basic, as we would call it. So I think being a product of the soft skill, knowledge skill, curiosity skill based all my life, I'm a strong advocate of that. And I think today we don't have a choice in that. It is very important. So any educational institution, any learning institution has to have an equal proportion of both. It has to be mandated and it's an equal proportion of both. Otherwise, as learners and as working professionals and as graduates, COVID or non-COVID, we're going to miss out on this very dearly. And I think it's nation building. The soft skill element and the element of what we need to do is nation building. And I think when you say leave it not to the world, I think what you're trying to say is some of the Western countries don't need that, because some of their education system, and especially in colleges, just teaches them in a way in which you're competitive. And when you're competitive, you start thinking and your mind gets trained in a very different manner. Right. Our schooling system in India is very strong. You get somebody from here, from America to come here, we're 3 grades ahead of everybody else. But the element is competitive skilling sets. It's very, very difficult. So I think this is very important.
Absolutely. Thank you for that. And Akash, we've obviously over the years heard about, how IIT churns out a certain type of of person, and considering AESL is focused on developing people for those institutes. Where is your role and part in specifically, and we can talk about Flaksha as well, but in AESL, how do you incorporate that in the preparation before a lot of your students are going into the IIT and that whole world?
So, we've always believed that, test prep training or coaching, has to be a supplemental element to what you learn in schools. I think we've always kept ourselves away from the coaching factory kind of a phenomena where you actually have to disdain or probably leave the entire, schooling curriculum and go out of your home and, just back yourself into a situation where you just learn about cracking an exam, not about, what life is, what social skills are, what values are, what peer learning is. I think as a model, we have in last 30 years developed ourselves as somebody who's, who values school education. And that is the reason why, we did not become a coaching hub phenomena. The very fact that, we, subscribe to a model where we have an excellent system of education for performance in test prep, we will create the system and create replicas of it and go around the country where the kid is, so that the kid doesn't have to leave the family learning, the school learning, and the social learning and come to us, after school hours into this test prep program if they want to crack an exam. So I think given the nature of the exam, it is highly, highly competitive. There are fixed number of seats and the number of aspirants are going up every year. But a situation like COVID, has actually given us a very good opportunity where we would always strive for more time with the kid. What can we do if a child is stressed or is not able to cope up? If the child has a specific strength in chemistry but is not able to cope up in physics, obviously the kid is bright and is getting certain things well, but why can't he get or she get other things well? So can we work on it? So I think given the COVID situation, what we have realized, there was a need of hybrid learning where you can get the best of both worlds, and you nurture your program, you nurture your pedagogy in a way that you are getting the values that you really need to become a personality who you are, to reach your potential, and yet, be on your track to achieve what you want to do in your career. So I think right now we are in a very, very good situation where people are ready to let go of inhibitions and hesitation that they had for online world. And they had certain, stereotypes for offline education that, or certain brand. So, this is a wonderful situation for us to, in fact, instill in a child's daily timetable a very, very good dose of value education, which wasn't possible earlier. We can actually leave away, the things which were not impactful in this new, well-balanced hybrid kind of an environment. So I think this is where we've been, promoting this balanced learning, that you go to school, you learn somewhere, and then you come for your test prep, and that's how you maintain a balance and not just go into a camp.
That's great. That's very inspiring. And Manish, the same question to you, again, coming back to the fight for employment in India and the fact that people are working to get skills essentially to enter the workforce. And so they're short of time, they're short of funds, they're short of energy. They just want to get to the end goal post. How do you at NSDC manage to include some of the value-based learning of resilience building, compassion, values, ethics? Is that something that you're able to give time to in that organization, and how would you?
So we see 2 layers of it actually. So I would like to say that there is certain attribute which people have when they come to us, because ours is a short-term training of about 3 months. And then there is the question of learning soft skills while they are still with us. And it's just about 3 months. So in the attribute part, which I consider extremely essential to understand, particularly for people getting into jobs, is because we have noticed people wanting to get into healthcare, and then after the skilling of about 3 months, which he did exceedingly well, he or she, they go and they realize in the hospital that they really can't handle an old man. They realize that. And then they actually back off, saying that, well, this is not a job I wanted. I was looking for healthcare. When we dig in deeper, the person a little deeper, then they say that we are looking for this particular job because we thought it pays well. And that's the reason I went there. So what we do now is we try and use
digital technical tools. For example, there is a very good app called KNACK, K-N-A-C-K. It's developed by Harvard University, a professor from there. And you can play that app for about 20 minutes. It's a game. It's a language agnostic game. And K-N-A-C-K. KNACK.
K-N-A-C-K. Okay,
Yeah.
we'll put that
And yeah, it's just an app which you could download. Two apps are there. You play that game, and when you play that game, it's language agnostic. So even if you're somebody who is not very well educated, you could actually play that game. And in about 20 minutes, it decomposes your personality into about 70 different traits and tell you in a scale of 100 what is your empathy level. So if let's say your empathy level is 25 in a scale of 100, you're definitely not meant for healthcare.
Right.
If it is going to be 99, you're meant for healthcare. Similarly, what kind of other attributes you have in terms of collaboration, teamwork, leadership ability, grit, various kind of things which we have mapped out that for different jobs you require different attributes. So we firstly in our counseling try to put people in the right jobs, basically trying to help them to understand themselves. That, okay, given the background that you have had, if you get into these kind of jobs, you will survive. If you go beyond that, you're pushing against your comfort zone. And if it is little beyond, you're good. But if it's far too ahead, then you're going to suffer out there. So therefore, just be careful about the frustration that you might face. So that's the counseling that we do. And then comes the ethics and the part of, I think, the soft skills about how would you communicate. So inbuilt into all our programs that we have is soft skills. We actually do quite a bit of that, about 100 hours of it, including English language speaking skills, because that's valued by people. And we do put that too. And at the moment too, some of our partners provide free certification. You can go to our website, and British Council actually has a free, I think 1 lakh facility for people to actually get this certification. So we provide those kind of stuff. Now, but I think in 3 months' time, you can only make so much a difference. So it depends a lot. I believe soft skills happens in schools, it happens in house, in your early childhood, and it also happens in, I think in many countries, if you look at it, then you'll find it happens in organized religion. In our case, I think the school is weak. There's the organized, we are a little, I think, touchy about the religion part, so I don't think so. We try to put any soft skills into church and temples and others, because we would find ourselves feeling unsecular, or rather not secular, if we did that. And then if we look at house, that's the only place where we get to learn soft skills. So, and therefore, I think the difficulties that we face with it, I don't think so 3 months killing can really make huge impact on that. But we are mindful of it, and we do try our best.
I just want to top in on that, Tara, with what Manish said, especially on the KNACK. It's a gamification app, and I think that's that kind of, and the fact that it's being used, that's the enthralling part, that's the engaging part of education that needs to come about. And that's why the blended world will see the ability for us to get the best of both worlds if we can get that sense of engagement. Because if a gaming app or gamification can build into training and get that kind of response that can get people to think sharper and answer sharper questions, those are the takeaways for us also as we look at what we want to do in this blended version.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for that, folks. We have a lot of questions that have come from our participants, which is always an interesting place to be. And we're going to get Shiv back in to do that Q&A section. But I'll kick it off on Shiv's behalf with a question to Shaheen. Shaheen, where do you see your fellows? What would your aspiration be in terms of what roles would you see them play in Indian society 10, 15, 20 years from today? And, is there more we can do to scale up if 7% really is the number that, this specifically is a question from a participant, that just 7 applicants are selected as teachers. What does this indicate on where the government is going wrong? So I guess 2 questions built into one. What would you aspire the roles for your fellows to play, ideally? And where is the government in all of this for your numbers to really be where they are? And then Shiv will take over with the Q&A for the others.
Yeah, thanks, Tara. So I think the multiplier in TFI is very, very interesting. So you have about 500 new fellows each year. So about 1,000 fellows at any given time teaching 32,000 kids. but our 3,500 alumni today are directly and indirectly touching 33 million children already, right? So you're talking about indirect or direct impact on 1 in 10 children in India already. So I think the multiplier is in the model and not necessarily in the number of fellows that we bring in. The question on where do we hope to see them? I'm a big believer that we need to be focused on depth and on scale both in education. And so the hope is to see them excel right from classroom teachers and making that a lifetime profession right to levels of policy. We heard just today that one of our alums has just today been made the chairperson of the Child Rights Commission in Delhi. And so you see alums who are doing in-depth focus on 30 kids and radically changing their lives, and then ones who are touching kids across the system. So the hope is to see them at all levels, but the bigger hope, Tara, is to see them working more closely together to drive collective impact. And I think that's going to be hopefully the magic that we'll see in the next decade. And just one other thought that I think didn't come up in the conversation, but when I think about the future of education, I just feel we have to do it with our children. And I just feel disheartened to go to conference and panel after panel where all of us who are so many steps away from being children are deciding why education, what and how. How do we elevate student voice and understand that our biggest resource in education is not all of us. It is our children, and they can be alongside us solving this problem with us. So hopefully that just sparks something in people's minds, but this is the thing that I think is keeping me awake at night right now.
I mean, I promise you in the next panel, we're going to get a student as well to do that.
Thank you for that. Appreciate that.
You know, in our Delhi board, we've just pretty much taken a decision to have 2 children come to our board meetings on rotation, and our aspiration is the Prime Minister of India to be a TFI fellow.
Yeah, with you. Yeah.
Over to you, Phil.
Great, Tara. Thanks. I thought that was a fascinating conversation at the end, especially about the, what versus the how of education. And I think that was so relevant. And I don't think that's talked enough about, especially in times like now. So I've got a bunch of questions. I'm going to move sort of quickly, conscious of time. So it's around online education, and maybe this is for Ronnie and Aseem perhaps, but 2 parts of around the value of online education. I think one is obviously the willingness to pay for online versus an offline course. How does that work? And 2, from an employer perspective, and as a recruiter, I can say if somebody came to me and said, look, I'm an MBA from IIM Ahmedabad bracket online versus offline, I suspect there's a different value. So just wanted your thoughts on 2 ends of that, an employer perspective and the student perspective in terms of willingness to pay. Maybe
I can go first. And I think the employer is always the last for the penny to drop. So Shiv, you're in that absolute minority or majority, whichever way you look at that. I spent 15 years in media trying to get advertising agencies and marketing people to understand digital is here to come. And they would always allocate this 2% and 3% for digital spend till one fine day the penny dropped, that the whole world is moved and these archaic people were in a different sense. So I can't put it more bluntly that we have to move with the times. I think we mix up the whole element of being habitual. And I think one of the things I think COVID has taught all of us is our routines and habits are gone for life. Okay, so if we've been disrupted our routines and habits, why can't we disrupt our thinking? And I think that's the next level of what we're doing here. So we have to question the fact, because I think with season 2, maybe distance education had its own challenges for it. Most people feel offline sounds like a quick way to get things done without understanding that it is deep learning. So I think it's a process that employers will have to get first. Actually, they need to get it first because then it becomes meaningful on the opposite side. For a working professional today to take a year off, to then spend money on boarding and lodging and move to another city, those are not choices. And most people with their socioeconomic reasons in India are compelled to get into the working part of their life very early. So again, they don't have a choice. And this is giving them a very clear choice. Now it needs the employer to give it respect.
True. Sim?
So Shiv, I'll just add to that. Anyone thinking seriously about solving education issues in India in the longer term will have to think along both axes of scale and quality, as has been mentioned. And we at Amity have been, of course, thinking about this for a long time, and therefore we have also been working on the online education part for a long time as well. We have been conferring with the government and advising in many ways, and we were the first approval for online education in the country. Now there are a few more. But we feel that universities in the future will have to think about this seriously. Can we create extensions where we are leveraging the technology component of online in our bricks and mortar, but also the ability to do research and build capability in the bricks and mortar for the online. But Ronnie is absolutely correct. It is not everyone's flexibility or ability to come for a full-time program. We must recognize that in our country still it is a luxury in many ways to be able to pursue a full-time degree. There are many people in the workforce who would have liked to get an education, but maybe they did a diploma and they want to go on to a degree. So I think online education provides a great leveling ability. It is a great democratizer. We feel that it will have a very deep long-term impact in the kind of people we can reach. I think we can have a transformative impact on the country through online education. And we don't only do degrees, we also are doing through Amity Future Academy, certification and diploma programs, the whole gamut. So I think there are a number of us, even on this panel, who could be working together, brainstorming together with Manish, with NSDC. We are already doing myriads of projects that are so amazing and have an impact on really the grassroots level in many, many states. So I think if we brainstorm, we come up with ideas that are amongst even us, hybrid. How do we do it? I think it's important for the employership. We don't need to tell you, you're the real expert at this. My feeling is that as the quality of online education improves, and we are seeing it in leaps and bounds, we are incubating ourselves at least a dozen edtech ventures, which we think will be answering some of the questions in the longer term about how we bring true quality into online education. Ronnie is doing a wonderful job. I think once we are able to provide that quality at scale, I think employers will see the benefit of having the increased enhanceability and qualification. So I'm optimistic that the market will be there as well.
And Asim, there were a bunch of questions around whether online degrees would get legal, and so how does that pan out in an India context?
Yeah, absolutely. Now online degrees are absolutely valid. They are recognized by the University Grants Commission. There has been the confusion arises from the fact, and I think the questions are not invalid, that for many years there were changes in regulation. Distance education was being regulated by DEC, then it went to AICTE IGNOU Joint Committee, then it came to a division of UGC. But now recently there has been incredible clarity, and there has been great progress in the governance and regulations of the government on how online education should be done. It is very encouraging that our Prime Minister himself has announced that he would like to see a greater rollout of online education from more universities, because it has, of course, this impact on the nation as a whole. So yes, online degrees in India are recognized, but at the moment, a few people have that approval. I hope that more and more people will get that approval going forward, so that many can benefit.
Great, thanks, Asim. Akash, I want to ask you, just connected to that, around, online education is one thing, but online testing, I mean, there are different points of view on that, and there's good and bad. Just tell us a little bit about that world and how is this likely to pan out?
I think currently there are more disadvantages right now in online testing because of the the plagiarism and internet issues and all of that. But once this settles, I think online assessment would be the way forward, because as of now in India, as Manish also mentioned, just taking a reference from there, the assessment has also been pretty rot. It's all paper pen based, and how fast can you solve, and how beautifully can you write. There are many more dimensions to assessing somebody's ability. There is audio. You can make it to hear and see how they comprehend the problem or the statement, or the situation that has been presented. It could be a visual assessment also that can take place. There could be simulative assessments that can take place. So there are many more things that can happen on an online platform. Given right now it's just you have a question, you have to solve it. It's very, very restrictive, I would say, in terms of its current system's ability to assess how good a child is. Look at competitive exams. It all, and at the end of the day, it all boils down to how well are you scoring and how fast can you solve those problems. Whether it is a good day or not a good day for you, whether audiovisual skills that can comprehend better. Because at the end of the day, decisions are not taken in black and white. There is a lot of abstractness which is there when you are in your career, when you're doing your job or whatever profession. So all these skills put together really brings out the right kind of capability that you're looking to admit in a college or to assess yourself. So I think way forward, when it becomes proctored, I think it will be far better proctored, and that too at scale. Everybody's talking about scale and the quality. So that is definitely is required. Proctoring is required, and the current system has a lot of challenges, I would say.
And Ronnie, maybe for you, just, from a technology perspective, how far have we got to on the stuff that Akash is talking about?
I think there's a lot of progress. And, technology and consumer trends has been married. We always think technology leads consumer trends. I'm a firm believer that consumer trends, actually, you've got to be able to gauge the consumer, and you have to preempt some of those trends. You've got to be looking around the bend either for a truck or for a trend. And sometimes it can hit you, but most of the time it hits you positively. And I think technology caters to that. But today there's a lot of versatility, I think so. And that is one of the reasons why I think, the democracy of education in many ways, and the fact that we can have global companies coming out of India is really going to happen. And it will be a case in point, because of technology, we don't have any borders. There's no head start somebody has for 5 years or 10 years in any other country. China has this distinct advantage of having a very strong home market. America has a very different thought process. And I think in India, because of our market and because of our strong pedagogy and our strong ability, actually our storytelling abilities are very good. We haven't been able to do that. And at the core, coming from media into education, I can tell you a lot of education is about storytelling. If I remember, Prakash went to Harvard, I think the most memorable things for him outside of his faculty would be his case studies. That's storytelling as far as I'm concerned. So I think if we bring that into what we do here, and especially at the K-12 level and the kids, it is incredible and magical.
Sure. Maybe for Shaheen and perhaps Manish, a couple of questions. I think one, there's some questions around whether you believe that teachers should be coming more from sort of practitioners or practicing managers vis-a-vis academics. There were one or two questions I saw around that. So just your thoughts about that. And there was another great question I thought on whether blended education will encourage diversity, whether that's by gender or income or, just being differently abled. I just wanted your thoughts on those two. Maybe Shaheen first and then Manish.
Sure. I can take the second one. I see blended learning as a massive opportunity for diversity and a real equalizer in so many ways, because we redefine who the teacher is. The teacher can be anyone. So in the blended world, a child can teach a child can teach a teacher can teach a teacher, child in Mexico can teach a child in India. So I think in that way, it's a real equalizer, especially for vulnerable low-income children, if we can, of course, address the issue of access to hardware. So today, the playing field is not level at all in that sense. I think I'll leave the first question for Manish, because it may have been referring more to higher education. Yeah.
In the case of skills, usually we would always want the teacher to be somebody who is a practitioner, because that's how he brings knowledge. I think we did a profiling of our teachers, and we haven't found the profiling to be as good as we would have wanted, because the number of years the teacher has spent on work was less than what we would have wanted, ideally, in terms of there are different traits, and therefore in some traits more than the other, but in average. But our preference is for people who have already done that and therefore bring in a lot of confidence of how they have solved problems on the soft floor, because that's what makes skilling knowledge getting transferred from him to the other person. In respect to the impact which the digital platform can bring to differently abled, we actually have some of our partners who do skilling for differently abled. We skill a large number of them actually, almost a lakh actually, and get the number of them employed. There are specific employment where actually people prefer differently abled persons. So for example, in Lemon Tree, you would have noticed tourism and hospitality would always want people who might not be able, who are basically deaf and dumb. So therefore, there are different kinds of choices that is there in the market, because they genuinely believe that the service that they can offer is of a higher quality compared to somebody who is normal. And therefore, we promote that. And there are at least 5 to 6 trades where they're really good. And in the digital world, we were quite surprised to find that the training that our partners were giving for the differently able did not stop. It continued in the online platform, and therefore they have adapted to that context. We have also created what we call a skill management information system, SMIS, which actually enables people to connect to jobs. So after you're digitally skilled, you could get connected to jobs. This one we find particularly useful for female employees or female workers, because female labor force participation in India is very low. It's about 23%. In some of the states like Bihar, it is 4%, which is lower than Yemen, which is the lowest in the world. And therefore, the idea was that can we utilize this method of skilling, which is digital based, doesn't require women to come out of the household, both for learning as well as for earning. Can we give them this platform? So that's something which we're trying, and I think could be a game changer when it comes to enhancing female labor force participation without challenging the social norms, because that becomes a different ballgame altogether. So I think there are lots of multiple advantages of the digital skilling and the value-add service which you could provide jointly with skilling.
Fascinating. Aseem, maybe a question for you. How does a traditional school, and this is a K-12, put your K-12 hat on, view companies like Byju's, and I don't mean Byju's on its own, but just companies like that. I mean, how does that work?
Yeah, I don't know. I strongly believe that we need many models in the Indian education scenario. One model will not be able to address all the needs. And I feel very excited to see a Byju's. The amount of children they're able to reach in terms of supplemental education, in terms of training, and also the proof of concept of EdTech in general, which can be a motivating factor and a role model for hundreds of other companies to aspire and think and build their own businesses in EdTech. I think that is a very good thing for our sector as a whole. For a long time, it was said that EdTech is a non-investable sector in the country, and we had something like 4,000 EdTech companies, out of which half of them have closed down already. So I think examples of people like Byju's and Ronnie's Upgrad and others, when they come and they prove the concept, then many more will come up. Within our group, we have a number of initiatives that would be supplemental to what Byju's is also doing, that are coming up and growing very quickly. So I think as an educator, absolutely exciting to see.
Great. I'm conscious we are in fact, we're not out of time, we're over time there. So maybe Tara, over to you for closing comments.
Just to say thank you. This has been extremely enlightening for me. I think my key takeaways have been that the concept of blended is actually a very positive movement for us, and it's good almost that we've been nudged to be able to get to this space of offline, online, and life skills. And I think it makes it aspirational that the access that this can create, as well as the diversity it can create, I think will be a huge shift for us, specifically in the Indian context. I think the evolution of content is going to become inevitable, as Aseem mentioned, Wally mentioned, even it. And now that we have the blended philosophy, the evolution of the content is only easier to be able to do. And I really love the comment about, education is different to academics that Manish talked about, because I think the lifelong learning term that Ronnie used, along with the concept of education is different to academics, really allows us to touch base with those in this entire paradigm that are learning, that are aspiring, and that are evolving. So with that, thank you all so much for your time, and for all the participants for being so engaged and for sending us so many questions. And I hope all of you have a lovely weekend, and stay safe and stay healthy.
Tara, thank you for being a great moderator. Ronnie, Shaheen, Asim, Manish, Akash, I think this was really great. We had lots of educators on the platform, a lot of people from various facets of the education industry getting some great comments from everyone. Thank you, guys. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Bye, everyone. Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks, Shiv.
Thank you.